Who is a refugee? Victim? Threat? Terrorist? Who is a refugee? A comedian? Teacher? Neighbour? Who is a refugee? Where do our biases lie? Good afternoon, fellow thinkers, doers and changemakers. My name is James Wheeler. We as Australians have pledged to protect and support those fleeing the horrors of prejudice, persecution and war, but we've fallen way behind. Our pledges are hollow, and our outdated misconceptions and perspectives have corrupted our view of refugees. Our failure to honour our commitment has allowed the media, influenced by deep-seated cultural assumptions, attitudes, values and beliefs, to slant the narrative and encourage the poor treatment and alienation of refugees in our society. Today, I implore you to look beyond these outdated perceptions and change the narrative surrounding refugees. Then we can drive our transformation into a more fair, understanding and prosperous Australia. Just like you, I'm part of the younger generation. I don't have any special titles or qualifications, but I don't need them, and neither do you. In the past, I didn't stop to think about the biases surrounding the portrayal of refugees in Australian media. But by reading more about this, I've started to realise the depths of the stereotypes and cultural assumptions surrounding refugees. I'm only a student, but a small spark can start a great fire, and I hope my small voice will kindle that blaze. As part of the next generation of changemakers, we are in a unique and powerful position to paint a new picture of how our nation perceives and treats refugees. Our choices, words and actions can work together to dismantle outdated biases and nurture a society that embraces compassion and understanding. Now, I urge each and every one of you to listen. Look past the stereotypes and speak up for those who don't have a voice in our community. In recent years, Australia has granted 20,000 humanitarian visas between 2023 to 2024, with most coming from war-torn countries such as Iraq, Myanmar, Afghanistan and Syria. Asylum seekers find themselves in prison for years, thousands of kilometres from mainland Australia, punished, brutalised and dehumanised for daring to dream of freedom. Why do we treat each other so poorly? The fear-mongering of the media is certainly to blame for controlling the narrative surrounding refugees, not as survivors, but as outsiders, as the enemy, as terrorists. Take this Daily Mail headline: asylum seeker felt compelled to commit crimes, which illustrates how the media frames not one, but all asylum seekers as inherently criminal, feeding the association between asylum seekers and crime instead of hope and resilience. This association will be demonstrated further on. A computer-aided quantitative analysis of the Sydney Morning Herald, as well as Herald Sun, reveals that of 687 newspaper articles, 78.5% used a military conflict in their refugee stories, reinforcing media's depiction of asylum seekers being a negative foreign threat to the nation. These choices in language rationalise detention centres as a type of protection for Australians, and allows the public to accept these inhumane policies. After all, if we see somebody as a criminal, it allows us to regard them as a danger to our society, resulting in asylum seekers being treated as such. By swallowing the negative narratives fed to us, we reflect a deeper societal xenophobia and become unable to breathe in positive stories of refugees. It is hard to appreciate the resilience and humanity of refugees in the constant absence of fair representation, feeding a vicious cycle of misinformation and distrust. While Australian media is dominated by fear-mongering, other nations have taken a different approach, showcasing how refugees can have a positive impact in society. Canada's private sponsorship of refugees, PSR program, allows private groups to fund refugees, helping them to start their lives and adjust to the nation. This program successfully resettled more than 275,000 refugees since its inception in 1979. According to Statistics Canada, employment rates are high among refugees, with 75% for males 5 years after entry in crucial sectors for economy, including healthcare, construction, and transportation. Even putting aside our moral obligations, refugees are good for a country. Not only is it just, but also logical for the nation and economy. Furthermore, this country clearly shows that asylum seekers are not threats. Canada has not had a terrorist attack linked to refugees since the entry of the 1970s private sponsorship program, with no incidents prior. The lack of incidents illustrates that the integration of refugees does not compromise national security, as some news articles may suggest. Australia, along with Canada, shares similar cultural and economic features, making it reasonable to expect an effective integration of this country's policies on Australian shores. If Australia adopts similar policies, harmful attitudes, stereotypes, and narratives can replace with stories of resilience and opportunity. This model can be transferred to Australia as the public support for refugees resettlement is growing, with recent surveys showing that approximately 70% of Australians support the increased numbers of refugees. Investment in integration pathways for refugees will facilitate their integration into our society and allow Australians to meet our humanitarian obligations. By following the footsteps of Canada, we can embrace a future defined by inclusivity and compassion. Not all refugee stories have to be about failures, victimhood, or survival alone. In his biography, The Happiest Refugee, comedian, author, and celebrated artist Anh Do takes the readers on the perilous path from Vietnam to Australia by boat. Anh fled the Vietnam War and overcome immense adversity on his trip to Australia by boat, including dangerous sea conditions, pirates, and lacks of food and water, to become now one of Australia's most beloved figures. His story highlights how courage and perseverance can open doors to transformative outcomes. His raw and striking narrative fosters empathy and understanding, educating us on the refugee experience and confronting cultural assumptions. We need to hear more stories like Anh Do's in order to hear refugees' points of view and better understand the positive impacts that they can have on Australia. Though Anh Do resettled straight into the Australian community, many refugees have been forced into offshore detention centres for years and treated as threats rather than individuals who each have unique skills, fears, passions, and aspirations. Take a look at Najeeba Waisvatos, who fled Afghanistan at age 10 with her parents, seeking asylum in Australia by sea in September 2000. Najeeba spent several grueling months in a mandatory immigration centre before she was recognised as human and not as a threat. In what well does an ordinary child fleeing violence deserve to be treated as a threat to national security? When Najeeba was finally settled after these traumatic months, she prospered and excelled in the community, now becoming the founder and president of Hazara Women of Australia, an organisation that assists refugee women in learning English and prosper like her in their new communities. Her experience is one of many examples of innocent asylum seekers being trapped in limbo. Just imagine if she had remained in a detention centre, as many others do, for many years at a time. Data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics show refugees' significant potential to succeed in Australia. From November 2019, 69% of recent migrants held a non-school qualification before arriving in Australia, and 68% of the recent 1.9 million migrants being employed. In contrast, according to the Refugee Council of Australia, the longest we have held someone without any criminal charge or suspicion has been 5,766 days, or 16 years. This is the equivalent of someone serving jail time for murder. But worse, because the jail does not meet United Nations standards and the person is innocent. When we don't give these individuals the opportunity of settling in Australia, we forfeit the benefits of their unique skills and passions. So as you consider these stories, I urge you to advocate for refugees and to see them not as threats, but as a key part of an inclusive and prosperous Australia. As Australians, we must reform our perspectives, values and beliefs. I call for you, the next generation of changemakers, to rise above outdated perceptions. I ask you to question our own perceptions on Australian refugees. I ask you to deepen your knowledge on the issue so that you can enact change. Don't hesitate to examine different viewpoints. Hear refugees' insights. Advocate in your local communities or educate the people around you. It might be as simple as reading Anh Do's book. But no matter what you do, be kind and don't let anybody tell you how to think. You have the power to change not only the future, but also that of someone else.